So this is going to be a quick tutorial for airbrushing. I'm going to start off with priming and then end with painting. I'm using a Master G22 airbrush for my primer. I'm using Vallejo's gray primer. It's already thin, all you have to do is shake it. So what I like to do is start off with cleaning out my airbrush just in case there's any gunk in there. I throw in some airbrush cleaner and I just spray until empty. And then I clean out the cup. And once it's ready, I pour enough of the primer to not completely fill up the cup, but just enough to do so. Here I start to test out the amount of primer that comes out of the airbrush. Pushing down releases the air, and pulling the trigger back releases the paint. You never want to do it all the way for both, because then you're going to get overspray and it'll start to puddle. So I'm starting off with very light coats, and less is more in airbrushing. You're going to want to do multiple light coats, and in between each coat, it's this technique called flash drying, where you just push the trigger down. So you can see I'm just blowing air all over the part to start to dry it a little faster than usual. And then you're ready for the next coat once you start to see that shine go away and it starts to turn matte, which means that the paint is beginning to dry. So here I'm starting to do my final coat, in which you can go heavier, and you can see that the entire piece is shiny, but that'll go out once it starts to dry. Here I am trying to prime a black piece, which is usually good for lighter colors that you want to be transitioned into darker colors. You can see the difference in the prime at the top, where I'm starting to cover that color. Here is a side-by-side of the original part, and then me trying to prime the part for a lighter color. And once the primer has set and dry, you're ready to begin painting. I save a lot of money on airbrushing by buying really cheap acrylic paints. I got these Applebarrel paints for 50 cents at Walmart, and this Winston & Newton Flow Improver. Any acrylic water-based paints can be thinned with Flow Improver or acrylic thinner. You're never going to want to thin too much. I've been airbrushing for a while now, so I've kind of learned how to eyeball it. Of course, you can do it by measurements if your cups have the measurements on the side, but the general rule to follow is below 50-50, so I like to do a combo of 40-60, 60% acrylic paint, 40% thinner, and you're just going to mix until you get the consistency of milk. And it's not going to be too runny. If it's too runny, you're going to get spots as it dries, and you're going to get uneven surfaces. So I like to run the paint along the wall, and if it drips down, you thinned it too much, and if it takes a while to drip down, then you're good to go. And so here I'm going to start loading up just a bit of that paint. As I mentioned before, you don't want to overfill the cup, just enough so that you can get a few coats. And if you pull the trigger back a little bit, the further back you pull it, the larger the amount of spray, because that's the amount of paint that comes out. And so I'm going to begin to do light coats. And this is a flag red color, like a very matte red. And immediately you're going to see that after the first coat, it's nowhere near red, it's more pink. But as I mentioned before, light coats is the way to go. By the end, you're going to get a very flat and dark red. So as you can see here, there's a lot of gray still showing. You see that there's still places that are gray. And so you're just going to keep doing light coats and slowly rotate your piece as you go, so that you get all the coverage over all the part, even the separated segments. And in that final coat, you're going to want to do a little heavier as you go, so that the paint gets full coverage. This is what it should look like right after. It's going to be a little wet, but it dries relatively quick. And so here I'm doing another part. I have it sped up so that you can see the difference between the beginning and the end, how the part turns a very dark red compared to how we had it prior, where it was like a light red, but that's only because it had one or two coats. This is after multiple coats. The part is completely covered. There are no gray spots anymore. And this was the end result. Did a little bit of dry brushing to give it a worn effect. But that was the tutorial for how to airbrush relatively quick with cheap paints.